Okay, what you will learn. We have all heard the human body described as some kind of inanimate object. Sometimes it's a house, you are talking about the importance of a solid foundation, and sometimes it's a car, usually in the context of food as fuel. I like to think of the body as a computer. I bet one that's capable of complex movements. Like a computer, our bodies are made of hardware, which is muscle, bone, organs, connective tissue, and run on software. The software is the brain, spinal cord, and nerves. Controls the hardware to initiate movement, to control it, and in the right circumstances and with proper coaching to improve it. The proper coaching part is where you come in. As you get deeper into the corrective exercise program, you will be employing increasingly complex muscle activation and joint stabilizing exercise. All of them are based on the idea that the software your client runs to control basic movements, such as lifting and squatting, can be reprogrammed to make those movements smooth and pain-free. But another way, you are the client's IT person. It's up to you to deliver the instructions and performance cues that take the bugs out of the faulty movement software. Yes, I'm stretching the metaphor, but not by much. New research shows that the nervous system is more malleable than previously thought. We now know that movement experience can change the structure and function of the brain. When your client move more and move better, their nervous system software runs better with fewer bugs. We will start this unit with a look at the function and component of nervous system, take a journey through its pathways, and finish by outlining how it produces and control movement. Function of the nervous system. The nervous system is your body's most diverse with these 6 primary functions. First, coordinate movement. It plans, initiates, and asserts ongoing control over every move you make. Second, process sensory input. This amazingly diverse category including smell, vision, taste, hearing, and somatosensory information like pain, warmth, itch, you need to scratch. These functions allow you to receive and interpret information from your joint, ligament, muscle, and skin. Next, it initiates and maintains life-sustaining function. These include our innate need to find water, food, and mate. Learn and forms memories. Learning and memory are the primary elements of cognition. After that, also experience emotions. Those include feeling of fear, pleasure, attachment, and drive. Last thing, it's control the arousals. Consciousness and sleep regulation are part of this function. Throughout these 6 functions, the nervous system forms a complex network of thoughts, emotion, and processes that goes far beyond movement and performance. But to keep it within our scope of practice, we will focus on the interplay between the first 2 functions, coordinating movement and processing sensory input. We will start by covering the components that make up the nervous system. What are the components of the nervous system? Even though the nervous system generally functions as an interconnected system, it can be divided into central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. The CNS consists of the brain, spinal cord, and all structure contained within it. The PNS is composed of the neural circulatory that travel outside the spinal cord down to the deepest layer of your joint and organs. Nervous system cells. This is the peripheral nervous system. Nervous system cells. The nervous system consists of 2 main types of cells, neurons and glia. The average human approximately have 86 billion neurons and 1 trillion glial cells. They work together to make you who you are. From your ability to run or lift or kick a soccer ball to your emotional response when you hold a newborn or stumble across a snake in the woods. Neurons. The neurons transmit information through electrical and chemical signals. Each neuron can produce a action potential, sometimes referred as impulses or spike, which is the electrical signal required for movement and perception. 3 types of neurons are in the body: motor, sensory, and interneurons. The motor neurons transmit commands from the brain or spinal cord to the muscles or gland. Sensory neurons transmit information into the brain and spinal cord or detect movement, sight, touch, sound, and smell. Interneurons, the most abundant in nervous system, create circuits between sensory or motor neurons and transmit information among different parts of the brain. A typical neuron include the components of dendrites, are branches of the cell body that act as receivers, collecting information from the other neurons. Next, the cell body or soma in the bulbous end of the neurons that contain the nucleus DNA. This part of the neuron integrates information and determine whether there is enough to create an action potential. Last thing, the axon. Its transmitter portion, relaying signal to other neurons, muscle or organs. The axon that travels from the spinal cord to the feet can be up to a meter long, but just 100 microns, a tenth of a millimeter wide. A muscle spindle is a sensory receptor within the muscle that detects a change in the length and help regulate contraction. It sends information to the sensory cell body. The information then travels through the axon of the spinal cord, where it communicates with motor neurons or interneurons. Neurons communicate with other neurons or with organs, muscle, or gland through the synapse, which is an area where either electrical or chemical signals are transmitted. Synapses can be located between two neurons or between motor neurons and muscle or gland. For example, when a motor neuron that innervates muscle is activated, it releases acetylcholine, which is a chemical neurotransmitter, at the neuromuscular junction. The binding of acetylcholine to receptors on the muscle triggers a cascade of events that result in contraction. Next, we talk about the glia. So we talk about the neurons, and now we talk about the glia. Unlike neurons, glia do not produce action potential. Their role is to support the neurons by providing the protection and nutrients necessary to keep them intact. The myelin. Myelin is a fatty sheath that covers the axis of a neuron, similar to an insulation around the electrical wire. Is a glial cell that's important for movement. It allows signals to travel quickly throughout the nerves, up to 90 meters per second. When a disease breaks down the myelin covering the neuron, it can lead to multiple sclerosis and other movement disorders. Now it's time to have a look at how all those components come together, once again focusing on movement and performance. The peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system includes all neurons and glia outside the brain and spinal cord, to which it sends constant information from the body. The PNS can be further subdivided into somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. Somatic nervous system, this division of the peripheral nervous system responsible for voluntary movement, including motor neuron that control muscle along with sensory neuron that receiving information from the muscle, skin, and joints. Autonomic nervous system is the other thing. This is a part of the peripheral nervous system control heart, lung, and gut. It's further divided into sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system generates the fight or flight response through the release of norepinephrine. The parasympathetic nervous system balances the sympathetic by activating the rest and digest physiological processes. These two systems work together to maintain homeostasis within the peripheral nervous system. Again, we return to the central nervous system. When all the aforementioned information from the PNS hits the brain and spinal cord, the CNS is charged with figuring out which is means and what to do with it. For that, the CNS delegates responsibilities to 7 individual components, which are found in 4 primary divisions. First, the forebrain include the cerebrum, which help learn and control movement, and the dicephalon, which relay and integrate information from different parts of the brain and spinal cord. The cerebrum is further divided into right and left cerebral hemispheres, which are connected by the corpus callosum. The brainstem, which is the second one, consists of midbrain, bones, and medulla. It mediates sensory and motor control of the head, neck, and face, along with balance. The brainstem also contains the sensory and motor pathway that travel to other parts of the CNS, as we will discuss later. Third one is cerebellum, which literally means little brain. Plans and coordinate movement. It contains more densely packed neurons that does any other subdivision of the brain. Lastly, the spinal cord, which transmits motor information down from the brain and sensory information up to the brain. It also contains reflex circuits. Because the spinal cord is particularly important for understanding how movement is produced, it's worth exploring it in greater detail. Spinal cord. The spinal cord is a long cylinder tube of both white and gray matter that extend from the bottom of the medulla down through the vertebral column. Both are made up of axons, but only white matter is covered by myelin. It gets its name from myelin's whitish appearance. Gray matter is gray because it includes cell bodies and terminal ending of neurons, which have little or no myelin. Spinal nerves emerge from the spinal cord to provide motor and sensory information to the body, which we'll discuss in detail later in this unit. Three layers of membrane, known as meninges, protect the spinal cord, with small space between each meningeal layer to provide nourishment through blood vessels and cerebrospinal fluids. There is also a small amount of cerebrospinal fluid in the central canal, the small opening within the center of the spinal cord that connect to the ventricle of the brain. Most of us assume that the spinal cord, which begins at the base of the medulla, runs the entire length of the spine. In fact, the spinal cord's ends around the second lumbar vertebrae. The area between L2 and the sacrum is filled with bundle of spinal nerves known as cauda equina. They extend to the bottom of the sacrum and innervate the muscle of the hip, legs, pelvic organs, and sphincter. The spinal cord is usually 15 to 19 inch long, depending on a person's height, and approximately 1/2 inch across at its narrowest section. The diameter increase in the two areas. The cervical enlargement is wider because it contains nerves that travel to the arms, whereas the lumbar enlargement holds the nerves that travel to the legs. Both structures provide more room for additional cell bodies. Let's talk about nerves. Nerves are bundles of axons that carry information within the peripheral nervous system. They are the pathway connecting muscles and other organs to the spinal cord and the spinal cord to those organs. There are three types: a sensory nerve, which is afferent nerve, carries information into the spinal cord; a motor nerve carries information away from the spinal cord to innervate muscle; and a mixed nerve, as you can guess from its name, carries sensory and motor information. It also handles autonomic information for the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, which we will discharge it so we can keep focus on the movement. Spinal nerves. 31 pairs of spinal nerves emerge from the spinal cord to control muscles in the body from the neck down to the toes. They are divided into regions that correspond with the vertebra from which they exit, giving you 8 pairs of cervical nerves, 12 pairs of thoracic nerve, 5 pairs of lumbar nerves, 5 pairs of sacral nerves, and 1 pair of occipital nerves. You can see the primary motor function of each region. Train your brain. No. Lower motor neurons. Don't let the word lower fool like a lower motor neuron carries information. A lower motor neuron carries information that leads to muscle contraction. It can extend from any part of the brainstem or spinal cord to control muscles in the face, toes, or any place in between. But another way, it has nothing to do with them being low in the nervous system. Each muscle is innervated by many lower motor neurons, each of which controls muscle fibers. The combination of single motor neurons and the fibers it innervates is a motor unit. The arrangement allows the nervous system to gradually increase the force of a muscle produced. When the nervous system determines that the muscle requires relatively little force, it activates relatively few motor units, and the one is it activates deploy the muscle's smallest fibers. When higher level of force are required, the nervous system brings in large motor neurons, which activate more and bigger fibers. This order of recruitment is known as the Henman size principles. Now, what is the motor neuron pools? The cell bodies of the lower motor neuron cluster in vertical columns within the gray matter of the spinal cord to form the motor neuron pool. every muscle have a motor neuron pool which can span multiple segments within the spinal cord. For example, as mentioned earlier, the neurons that innervate the biceps come out of three spinal nerves, C5, C6, and C7. You can think of it as three highways that originate in three distinct parts of a city but all travel to the same suburb. The motor neuron pool can be activated by signals from the brain or from circuits within the spinal cord. How does the brain do this? How does it feel? What the muscle is doing? The answer starts with the pathway formed from the upper motor neuron, where information travels from the brain downward to the motor neuron pool. That's the focus on the next section. The motor commands. Contract your right calf muscle. What just happened? Obviously, you sent a signal from your brain to the muscle, but how did it get there? Voluntary movement starts in the cerebral cortex, which is the outermost layer of the brain. It's approximately the size of a dinner napkin and 1/3 of a stick as a deck of cards. It wraps around the deeper layer of the brain to form folds and ridges. Voluntary movement is planned, initiated, and directed by the motor cortex. So the motor cortex plan, initiate, and direct, which are a combination of three cerebellar cortex regions: premotor cortex, primary motor cortex, and supplementary motor area. The motor cortex communicate with the lower motor neurons through a pathway called the neural tracts. Unlike spinal nerves, which carry both motor and sensory neurons, neural tracts specialized in one or the other. Thus, we have descending tracts for sending motor information down toward the muscles and ascending tract for sending sensory information back up to the brain. Descending tracts. Within the brain are 8 descending tracts formed by axons of upper motor neurons. 3 originate in the motor cortex. They are charged with planning, initiating, and directing movement. The other, which originate in the brainstem, control facial movement and posture. Those are mostly involuntary reflex action, unless you think. Unless you think someone's looking, you don't waste a lot of energy controlling your facial expression or focusing your posture when sitting or standing. And yet this involuntary action are an essential aspect of complex movement. For example, if you press a dumbbell overhead while standing, you focus in the moving parts of your shoulder and the elbow joint, not on the long list of trunk and lower body muscles that contract to keep you upright. Now we will look at how sensory information flows to the opposite direction from the muscle and joint to the spinal cord and then up to the brain. Sensory feedback. Imagine this: you are standing blindfolded with your body relaxed and someone left one of your arms up and out of the side. You didn't send a signal from your brain telling your arm to move, and because of the blindfolded, you cannot see that your arms have moved, but you still know exactly where is it. Now imagine that while still blindfolded, someone hands you a barbell and tell you to lift it, even though you cannot see exactly how much weight you are lifting and lowering. The tension in your muscle give you a sense of whether the barbell is heavy or light. The important information come to you through proprioceptors that are located in the muscle and joint and reach your brain through the ascending tracts. So the ascending tracts, we have 5 ascending tracts that carry in sensory information through the spinal cord up to the brain. Because the tracts are composed of axons covered in myelin, they are containing in white matters. Collectively, they communicate the sensations of proprioceptions, touch, pain, pressure, and vibration. These are the 5. Training your brain. Why practice doesn't make perfect. When you are repeatedly perform any movement, from shooting a basketball to lunging with a dumbbell, your brain develops what's called a motor program. It's a blueprint of the act, an effortless and automatic movement your body can perform without you having to give it much thought. Any movement you practice will be Store it as a motor program. If you practice a movement incorrectly, like jumping off the wrong foot or shoot layups or rounding your back on a deadlift, your motor program will give you a blueprint for a bad form. The longer you reinforce that program, the harder it will be to insert a new program in its place. This is why it's not enough to tell your children or athletes or clients that practice make perfect. It's only true if you practice in a way that wires your brain with the best possible technique. In other words, perfect practice make perfect. Now, interneurons. So far, we have focused on how muscles are activated and probably did so in more details than you expected, but we need to go even deeper and examine another aspect of movement, how the nervous system inhibits muscle. For that, in turn to interneurons, which among many other duties inhibit other neurons. For a joint to move, the agonist muscle must be activated while the antagonist muscle is inhibited. For example, during elbow flexion, the descending tract sends signals to the motor neuron pool that activate the biceps, while simultaneously signaling the pool that inhibits the triceps. Inhibition of the triceps require an extra neuron, which are the interneurons, to function as a roadblock. Here is one about train your brain. What do we need? Why do you need sleep? Scientists always knew that sleep was important, but they were not really sure why. It's appeared that sleep opened up vascular area of the brain between the neurons. This open space allows cerebral spinal fluid to rush in and flush out waste products. Indeed, it appears that CSF scrubs the brain free of debris while you sleep. Think of CSF of your brain's housekeepers. Now, spinal cord and brain stem circuit. Interneurons are also influenced by two sensory receptors in the muscles, which are the muscle spindle and Golgi tendon organs. Interneurons are also the muscle spindle is positioned parallel to the muscle fiber, allowing it to lengthen or shorten in synchronize with the muscle. That's its job, to detect change in the muscle length due to the alpha-gamma co-activation. When a muscle lengthens rapidly, a potential injurious action, the muscle spindle sends distress signals into the spinal cord. There it forms two synapses, one with the muscle that being stretched and the other one with its antagonists. There's cerebral innervation cause the muscle that's being stretched to contract and its antagonist to relax. The Golgi tendon organs located between the muscle and its tendon detect change in the muscle tension. A muscle generating force activates the Golgi tendon organs, which send the signals into the spinal cord also. The GTO thus help regulate movement at all levels of the force. To recap, sensory feedback from the muscle spindle and Golgi tendon organs relay information to the spinal cord and brain. Interneurons integrate signals to inhibit the appropriate motor neuron pools. Now we will finish the two brain structures that complete the motor system. So now we can initiate a movement and we know some reflexes, which from the spinal cord, we have a basal ganglia and cerebellum. So far we looked signals sent to the muscle by the descending tract and signal received through the ascending tract. But there is a third part of the system. When your brain receives information from the muscles, it needs to respond by sending back instruction to fine-tune, coordinate, and otherwise regulate movement. Let's return to our old friend the biceps curl. The basal ganglia would start the exercise by telling the descending tract to activate the muscles that produce elbow flexion. It would also regulate the movement, which means smoothness and speed. If the basal ganglia become dysfunctional, movement disorders such as Parkinson's disease or Huntington disease can result. This is Parkinson's disease, which mean a lot of vibration. The muscle have no control because the basal ganglia are not working, and this is the Huntington disease, which is a movement disorder caused by damage of the cell of the basal ganglia. Okay. The other player is the cerebellum, which both initiate and predict movement It then compares the actual motion to what it predicted and use that information both to fine-tune the movement while it happens and to make better predictions in the future. Therefore, although it doesn't directly control movement, the cerebellum influences movement in real time and works to make sure the movement is performed a little better the next time around. Okay, the cerebellum has a complicated rule, which is make sure the movement is performed a little better next time. After that, he talk about neuroplasticity, which we talked about before. After he make experiment of people who are playing piano, the researcher found that with a week, the subject's brain began to change. Area of the brain that control finger movement for playing the piano were taking over areas previously associated with other movements. There was even more to study. Okay, this is the neuroplasticity, which means the brain change its functional and structural capacity. Last thing is the summary. The nervous system has peripheral and central components that work together to control voluntary and involuntary movement. The nervous system cells consist of neurons and glia. Neurons produce the electrical signals required for movement and sensory and reflex action. Glia protect and nourish the neurons. Nerves and tracts form pathways through which information can reach every part of the nervous system. These pathways are formed by the axons of motor and sensory neurons along with interneurons. Skeletal muscles is activated by the lower motor neuron within a motor neuron pool. A motor neuron pool is controlled by a descending pathway from the brain and interneuron within the spinal cord. Interneurons have a wide variety of function within the brain and spinal cord. Some of the interneurons within the spinal cords are controlled information they receive from sensory receptors and the descending tracts. The basal ganglia and the cerebellum provide input to the descending tract to help initiate the proper movement and then fine-tune the movement as it's happening. The motor cortex region of the brain that control voluntary movement can recognize its connection to influence the structure and function of the motor system in response to practicing novel and skilled movements. Thank you.